This episode of Archispeak is sponsored by Arcat, and by now you have definitely heard us talk about Arcat, and hopefully you've taken the time to visit their site, because this is a great tool for you.
From small architectural firms to government agencies, everyone can benefit from what they've created. Arcat has huge libraries of free content. Big, massive, right?
Enormous.
Ginormous, right? That's a word. That's
Ginormous.
Officially a word now, right? I think it is. I don't know when that happened, but anyway, so we have CAD, BIM, specifications, and more. Not we, they do. Arcat, that is. And why is it important to you? Because Arcat has done all of the work for you.
I need a spec. You need a spec? Yeah. So it's in the CSI 3-part master format, available in multiple file formats. And this is just one example. Arcat has tons of building product content ready for you to use.
And guess what? It's all free to use. You don't have to register to download content. I don't know about you, Evan, but that's a big time saver for me.
Yeah, just leave the page if that happens.
Exactly. That's exactly what you do. So with Arcat, you don't have to do that. And if you've had to use other sites like that you must have to register to content, that's just a pain in the butt. Nobody wants to do it. Why bother? Just go straight to Arcat. Go to arcat.com, get all of this information free of charge.
Yeah, and on the last episode, we kind of joked around and talked about the augmented reality cat. And so Arcat retweeted us on that, and they actually put a link to, I thought this was pretty cool because this was not on my radar, that they had released VR Cat, which is the augmented reality cat's nemesis, is the virtual reality cat. And it's pretty cool. So if you guys have a Vive headset or an Oculus, head over to the Steam store and you can pick up VR Cat and you can design in 3D. And it's a pretty cool tool that Arcat has put together. And I love the play on the logo with the VR Cat. So check it out. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, just as a little bonus there as well, because it's pretty cool. So thanks Arcat for sponsoring this episode of Archispeak.
And we're also sponsored by BQE. When you need to know your project's earned value at a moment's notice, I know I need to know that all the time.
I like to look at those charts and graphs.
Absolutely. So if you're up late wondering which clients to take care of first, turn to BQE Core. It combines project management, billing, accounting, and business intelligence all in one elegant, accessible platform.
It's made by BQE, the makers of Archie-Office. Everybody's heard of Archie-Office, right?
Yeah.
Core's unparalleled insights, native mobile apps, and powerful automation will transform your firm.
I need that.
Learn more and get a free trial at www.bqe.com/core. And thanks to BQE for sponsoring this episode of Archispeak. Welcome to Archispeak, the podcast that talks about what it's like to work in the profession of architecture.
Welcome to episode 126 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
So this episode, we got somebody to write in and ask us a couple of questions about where do our ideas come from, and the word that they used was Parti. And so we don't probably use that word as much as we used to. I know that was a big word when we were in school. It was the frequency
huge in school.
Yeah. So basically, where do the ideas come from, and how do you come upon them? I guess one of the more interesting questions that I see is can you tell what the Parti is by analyzing a favorite building? And again, that kind of takes me back to schools because we did case studies all the time. And I don't know if we do that mentally now or do it physically anymore, but it was one of those things that we did a lot of in school. So I thought it's a good topic because I love the idea of having a design Parti for a project. And
well, I was going to ask, so was the listener, did he write in, was he asking about our Parti for, how we approach architectural projects, or was it how we approach the podcast? Because
no, architecture.
If I was going to say, because if it's the podcast, if we have this chief organizing thought, as the Wikipedia dictionary would say, we don't.
Nope.
we'll go ahead and just put that one out there.
Roll
We
with
have
it.
no organizing thought in what we do here at all.
No, it's ad hoc. It's because we all have normal jobs too.
So, Evan, should we not maybe define the term party if people
Let's do
don't
it.
know it? Okay, so according to Wikipedia, the term parti usually, literally translates as departure point, but in architecture lingo, it is most often referred to the project's big idea. It signifies an architect's overall guiding idea for a design.
Yep.
So, if you've never heard the
Good
term,
definition.
now you have.
I like the department or the departure point. So, also, even if you look at it, because we used to also say it in our, the parti pris.
Yeah.
And add that on there, and then that was meant decision taken.
Right.
And
That's when you've actually you've moved from design ideas
idea.
and options to the idea.
This is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is it.
So how do you? Okay. So let's talk about this. How do you guys start with your big idea? I mean, you're here. You are. You've just signed your contract with your new client, and you've sat down. You've started talking to them. How do you? Or what's the process to get to the big party? What kind of party do you throw for your party?
Yeah. So there's so many ways to get there. I don't have like a formula to do it, and I think you guys is probably kind of similar because
Absolutely,
it's one of those things where there's so many variables in play that it's something that develops on its own to some extent. I mean, you're kind of guiding it and looking for it, but it's one of those things where, if I'm doing an elementary school and I've got 3 different user groups, I'm going to come upon it one way. And if I'm doing this, like this latest project that I'm working on right now, where this is a project reboot, we're completely redoing a project that we've already done 100% because of funding issues. We've taken a step back and they've said, okay, we're gonna do over, and we already know so much because we've done the project before. This one is quite a bit different. We're just kind of on our own to develop the party. Sometimes I'm mining information, and then sometimes
Right.
I'm kind of coming up with my own inspiration of what's gonna guide our team to create kind of the first presentation of the party to the client.
You're bringing up a good point, and so and I don't know where the listener was coming from, whether or not he's a student, or a active professional,
Non-architect,
but
non-architect.
Oh, that's right, non-architect.
Yep.
I forgot that. Okay, so you alluded to the fact that we use it less in the profession than we did when we were in school. And in school, we really had the idealized situation where we were creating, this thing from an idea or a nugget that we were given as part of the syllabus. Like, this is what you're going to do, but you need to develop the party and you need to develop everything around it.
Yeah, they give you a framework or guidelines or a program, and then you have to develop the party.
Right, but what you were just listing off was really the reality of where kind of big ideas don't come from just one place. They really have kind of this context to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, I mean, to me, a lot of it basically comes with a context, and it's not just context of where that building's going to be sitting on the site or things like that. That's one of them. But another one is everything that you were listing about. Who are the user groups? What's going to be the chief thing about this particular building or the use of this building? I mean, there's, so many different things about it. So it's kind of interesting because the big ideas can come from, like take for instance, we're doing Duke School of Nursing and Physical Therapy, a third building in the School of Nursing. And one of the things, because it's physical therapy, is we've got this entry vestibule common space. You go through the entry vestibule into this big common space. And this big common space was supposed to really feel Duke. And for some people who know Duke, they know what that means. And I didn't, and I needed to learn. But, it's a collegiate Gothic campus, and even though the new medical campus is kind of going beyond your standard collegiate Gothic and is doing more of a modern interpretation of collegiate Gothic, we needed to develop a partie for this common space, because that was what's really going to be the Duke space. Yes, I did just use air quotes again. Could you guys tell?
Yeah, I could, actually.
And so one of the things that we did was, because this was a, school of physical therapy dealing with the human skeleton and the human body and things like that, that was kind of where I developed the idea, or at least even the team, I'd been talking even before I got on it, is taking elements or ideas from the human body and kind of working through an idea,
Yeah.
And so the thing that we were doing is like I've got kind of a very skeletal structural system that's exposed. It's got, your Gothic arches, but it's in a very more modern interpretation of it, with plate and pin connections for each of these to kind of represent joints and things. And started doing diagrammatic explorations between joints and steel plates and things like that. And so it's interesting that the partie, kind of bring it back to where partie in this particular case was purely very specific to that particular element of the building, and kind of developed it from there.
Well, I think what's interesting about the big idea on projects is, this is a great question if you're ever jurying a design charrette or going to like a midterm or a final crit at school in a design studio, because if somebody cannot clearly state their big idea, then the project ultimately is very difficult for anyone to read. Because if you can state the big idea, and this goes back to one of the parts of the original question, which was, can you analyze a building and see what informed that entire project? Can you tell what the partie is? And I think good buildings are readable by not only architects, but by the general public as they go through the space. If they can figure it out, then that's a successful translation from beginning to end of a strong partie. And so what is a partie? How is it manifested? Is it, because I think it doesn't just have to be a drawing, although typically in architecture it could be a sketch, it could be a diagram, it could be a 3D diagram, it could be a 2D diagram,
right.
But it could also be like just a sentence. It could be written. I think there's so many ways to kind of start. So like when you go back and you think about where that big idea came from, sometimes it's just words and thoughts, or sometimes it's a collage of similar images. Sometimes it's, I don't know, there's so many, it's sketches in a sketchbook. But I think what's interesting is, it should be a common thread. And the way that in my work that it really is a useful tool, I guess, not just a foofy architecture thing that only architects talk about, is that it is something that you can go back to and always use as a guiding principle for the building and say, is this true to the original idea? Is this true to the big idea? That helps us make sure that we're on the right path throughout the entire thing. It helps you make the right decisions because it all has to be grounded on that big idea. It was not a very eloquent way to say that, but
it's interesting. I don't know how you guys do it in your office, but one of the things that the principal in charge, every time we have a pinup and we're going through, design changes and things like that, one of the things that he always says is, what's your big idea? Have you lost it? Is it still apparent in, all these multiple changes, like you were saying earlier? Now we're layering all these different user groups, on this and stuff. And has that kind of lost the big idea, or is the big idea still maintained throughout the process? And those are, it's great to kind of like continue to keep talking about that and make sure that that's kind of, part of the, part of the idea.
I think it's a central focus of the presentations with the client so that everybody's on the same page. Otherwise, that it's way too easy to lose when somebody's special interests get involved.
So that's actually where I was going with it, is that, so it's great that this particular question came from a non-architect, because we have these pinups and we talk about, the big idea, all the time, and how, you know, the big idea is still relevant or not relevant and stuff like that. And so, but we understand it, and we're looking for it, and we want to make sure that we as architects and designers and stuff are making that it's still coherent all the way through. But because this was a question that came from a non-architect, and actually does that big idea resonate with them?
Right.
Is it
still relatable?
Understood.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do they understand what it means? And if it's still throughout the whole process relatable for them, that's really where the success of the building is.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because I see a lot of architects who, we've talked about this before, designed by Google. In that episode, we talked about pulling a bunch of images together of a bunch of different things that you like. And, you know, who cares if you really like it? I mean, it's one of those things where you're pulling a bunch of elements off of different buildings and slamming them all together and making something. I mean, that's not design with a Parti in mind. I mean, the language is in service to the idea. Ultimately, it should be for that kind of clarity that you want to reach with the project. Otherwise, it is incredibly hard to read and understand by not, let alone architects, right? But actually the people, the users of the building. It often manifests in a diagram, and we sometimes now we just call it what's the diagram, right? We don't even say the word Parti anymore, but it is a Parti diagram.
Right.
If you go to like Big's website, their whole front page, at least it used to be, I don't know if it still is, was like this periodic table of diagrams, and because their buildings are all about the diagram. You know that also when you go visit the diagrams. And I think the best types of architecture, and I'm kind of thinking about where you live, Cormac, you know, the Washington, D.C. area, when you go to Pay's Museum, or if you go to the Goog up in New York, or if you go, you know, it's incredibly clear what the idea is in these great kind of master works of architecture. And I think that's something that we all strive for when we're creating our clients' projects.
And that's when, so like the clarity of the diagram was really something that we had talked about as part of like the big idea. Again, you've got all these different user groups who've got all these different constraints that are overlying, you know, this one general idea and this big idea, and how it was, you know, maintained through it. And so, as you're saying, like when you can go into a building and you can immediately pick up on like the clarity of the idea, you know, like this big idea. So like, let's just use the Pay National Gallery. You go in there and you're into this big central space, and everything kind of, much like the Guggenheim, everything kind of radiates off of this big central space. But so you go in there, but the circulation is very clear. Everything that kind of like the idea, the decisions, let's go back to the big idea, are all very clear in the building. So you don't have to guess at what it is, what it does, and what you need to do to kind of interact with the building.
And it doesn't mean the building has to be simple either. It could be incredibly complex.
Absolutely.
I think some of my favorite examples are what Todd Williams, Billy Chen do. I mean, they actually have these diagrams usually embedded into the building at some point. Like when I went to visit the Neurosciences Institute in La Jolla, I mean, they actually have bas-relief castings in the concrete of the Parti diagrams. And they're kind of like fun to go find because it's like a little treasure hunt, right? Cool. They're little Easter eggs. And I have some pictures of them. I'll post it in the show notes so you can see. But think of the Salk Institute, another fantastic example of a very clear Parti. Yes, it presents itself as simple, but it is incredibly complex to get to that point. And it takes a level of complete understanding and mastery to actually pull it off at that level.
Don't you think that, I think the successful Parti, let's use it, is that the complexity has been thought through so completely that it becomes very simple.
Yeah. That,
you know, you've seen all of the different ideas and how it works, and because it's such a complex building, to make it really work and really, because we're not designing for architects, we're designing for the everyday user, or in this particular, like the Salk Institute, you know, this is a scientific research center, and so it's got to be very simple so that they don't have to struggle to get to their, you know, wherever they're working or wherever they're doing their research, because you made an overcomplicated building or, you know, something. So take all of the complex things about it. I mean, distill it down and make it work so simply that they don't have to struggle at the work that they're doing within the building.
Sometimes it's a really refined diagram, but sometimes it's just a sketch, right? Sometimes, like I think about Gary's work, and you look at kind of the initial sketch and then the final outcome of the building. No matter what it is, I mean, you can always see the seed of that idea in that sketch, and sometimes they just look like, wadded up paper on the desk or whatever, right? But it's amazing how it does translate, and I think for a non-architect that might be kind of hard to see, but for those who are kind of used to it, it's like, that's really cool to see that kind of make its way through the entire project, even starting off as the most simple, fragile single lines on a page turning into a building at the end. I mean, those people who work in Gary's office work incredibly hard to ensure that intent makes it all the way through to the end, from that crazy sketch in the beginning, that napkin sketch.
I can only imagine. But I mean, we do it as well. And if you think about it, when you start off with a project and you're kind of doing these real quick sketches with the client, and you're talking about, well, it could be this or this or this. That may be the most successful part of the project, is getting those initial ideas out on paper, and then it's the struggle to get it from that initial idea to the end and maintain that energy and that kind of exuberance of those sketches in the meeting when you were sitting down and kind of really pouring every bit of idea that you have, they have, and everybody else that was sitting at the table has, and try to just maintain that line all the way through to the end. Then when you're handing the keys back over to them.
Now what about projects that don't have this? I mean, that to me, that's fairly what sets architecture apart from buildings, and architects do buildings all the time. So I don't want to try to belittle it in any way. I mean, there's lots of times when we have to do, like, a maintenance building or this or that, or it doesn't matter. And I'm just wondering, like, we've all done projects.
Is that a shot at me?
Oh yeah. I forgot
your very first project.
But I mean, just thinking about it, in that it's not always something that happens, I guess, is. And so as far as like I guess what I'm wondering is there an awareness in your guys' offices? I mean, maybe Neil, you tell me with your guys' stuff, because your stuff is very different from what we're doing. You're doing complexes, you've got
buildings. You defined it earlier. We do buildings. That's okay.
No, I'm wondering. What I was wondering was, do you guys have an awareness of Parti in the projects that you do? Because what I meant by you're doing complexes is, like, you're doing incredibly dense living environments, multifamily housing. I mean, you're stacking, and there's so much going on there. Is it really just more developer driven, or is there an art and architecture? Is there a Parti going on in there? Or, because I'm sure that it's different depending on the project.
So how do I answer that? The simple answer is probably no, but it's a little more complex than that, because let me give you an example. So I'm doing affordable rehab projects right now. So I'm dealing with existing buildings and we're rehabbing them. But at the same time, we're also, on at least 3 of them, I'm adding small community buildings to them. And in one, it's attached, and in 2 others, they're separate buildings. And so there is sort of a Parti going on. There certainly is a, what are we trying to do here, sort of design idea behind it. And in one, I actually, instead of doing the client, I guess I want to go back as we're talking here to get sort of more towards the beginning on this, the way I see it. The Parti for us is oftentimes, or for me, I shouldn't say us, for me, what are the client's needs and desires? What is their hope or need that they need to have or to get out of this building or this space that they're asking us to do? And so for me, at least, that's that's my guiding principle. And something that I return to when we're making decisions. As you mentioned earlier, Evan, how do you answer some of these questions that you come upon during a design process? And I always go back to, okay, what are the needs of this building? What does the client need? And we use that to make those decisions. So that is kind of our party that we're working towards. And in this one example, the client wants a community building. It has certain things that it has to have. But the way I saw it, and it's going in this location that it's at the end of a parking area, and it's the other side of it's a small open patio space, basically. Not small, but not real big either. And they just wanted to put a big building there. And one of my thoughts was, okay, we have these spaces that we need to provide, one of which is a laundry, one of them is a service office maintenance, and then the other is kind of a community space, which has some kitchen facilities and some computer facilities for training and other things. And to me, I saw that as two separate sort of things. And so actually, I split the building. And it took some convincing because the client, this is an affordable housing developer, they see one building as simple, right, and cheaper. And so I'm like, no, we're going to let's split this apart. That way, from the parking area, as people, come into the project, they have an avenue. They have some space to come through, and we can put some trees and benches in there between the buildings. And that way, when they're doing laundry or they're coming to meet at the services office or something, if there's somebody there, they have a place to hang out, and we can create this little space in between. And so for me, it was like, okay, I took their desires and their wants and their needs, but then added the architecture, the twist. How can I make this a better space? And so again, answering the questions, going back and saying, what do they need? And then how can I make that better? But we're still meeting the need. Am I meeting? Because I couldn't have convinced them to do the two buildings if I couldn't convince them that I was still meeting their need. They're part of the party, their big idea, right?
And making it better, right?
And making it better.
Giving that layer of clarity to the people who are going to be using that facility all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that happens on a lot of our projects. It's more kind of what are the needs. And sometimes for what we do, if I go back to some of the multifamily stuff, is the needs of the client are, we need so many different plan types or building types and so many units on this property, and how do we make that all happen? So the guiding principles are oftentimes numbers that, we're trying to hit so many bedrooms, baths for each unit and square footages. It's very much programmable. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so there's not that big idea, although coming back to our affordable stuff, when we're doing two of the projects I'm doing on the affordable side are very older buildings, 60 years old, and so they're really rundown apartments. So we're actually reskinning them and tearing out the gypboard and redoing the electrical and everything. So it's a big job. And so there is a design guiding principle that we're applying. The client wanted something a little more modern, and so we're getting to play with that. The smaller, less detailing around the windows. We're not doing all the normal kind of craftsman sort of things that we could maybe do on residential, but we're getting much more modern on these buildings. So we're coming back to that, and we're doing those types of things, and that is our party. We're coming back to those ideas, and then how do we implement them throughout? So, it's fun, and it's something a little different, but it's not on the same sort of scale where we do a little squiggly sketch or something, and we say, okay, that's our guiding principle, and that's the kind of layout. I know we'll have some images of Salk and your Neuro Institute photos, which, by the way, are Neuroscience Institute photos, which are fantastic. I was just taking a peek at them. And we don't really have those sort of things that kind of guide our buildings, because in residential it's a little different. But that can happen. I mean, I've done stuff like that before where, you have this design idea at the beginning, and it could be just a sketch, and you can see how that you want to keep that in there throughout. So, and sometimes that's frustrating when your client changes something, and it's like, oh, now I've lost that. So that's a challenge.
I was going to say, or you just try your damnedest to try to convince them that why you want to keep that kind of like that Parti or that kind of like governing thought, which is usually proves to be probably the biggest challenge in anything, is when we're trying to convince them that, you know, this whole idea, this governing thought that we've been trying to push all the way through the design, and it comes back and it's maybe a little bit more expensive than we thought it was going to be, trying to maintain and hold on to it.
I just threw an image into our show notes because it had when we all went to the Barnes Foundation building back in Philadelphia at the last AIA convention that we went to.
Love for that building.
There's a recognition plaque. I think it's like a stainless steel plaque or something. It's out in the courtyard, and it had all of the individuals who were part of the design and construction of that. And right there, stamped into this plaque, or, you know, it's not really a plaque. It's not like a bronze plaque, but it's this really cool in memoriam of everybody, you know, just kind of taking a snapshot of everybody who was involved and putting their names on the building. I think that's one thing that's really interesting about this firm, you know, Billy Chen and Todd Williams, is that they actually signed their buildings. And this plaque also puts a name to everybody who worked on it. But right there on the plaque is a Parti diagram. And I
like that.
It's just a neat architectural way to kind of bring it all back together and explain that, show, I guess, how that did make it all the way through. It's pretty cool. So Cormac, what about you guys? You guys have like this open awareness about the Parti?
Yes, in fact, actually, that, like I said, you know, one of the first things that we talk about is, what's the big idea? What are we trying to convey? We know what kind of building it's going to be. We know it's usually been something that may have been spawned off on one of our planning efforts or things like that. So, you know, there's this governing idea of how it fits into the overall long-term vision. But now we're kind of hyper-focused down on this one little building. And so now that we're looking at that, how does that, you know, have a micro view, macro view? And so then how does like that talk to everything else? And it's just so, yeah, actually the great thing about our principals in charge are they're very hyper aware of the big idea. The difference between, you know, and I was going to mention this with Neil, is like the difference between some of the stuff that we're doing and some of the stuff that you're doing is we're doing one-off buildings. Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of freedom in one-off buildings than there is with things that, you know, have certain expectations to them that, you know, okay, this is a residential house and so, or a residential complex or things, and this is what we expect out of these things. And so you have, you know, the constraints of expectations that this has got to be so generally marketable to everybody that you've got users that can come from every walk of life, and it's got to meet everybody's. And, you know, a lot of times, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have kind of like this universal appeal, but a lot of times we, you know, get the luxury of being able to cater to a singular audience. And a lot of times that gives us a little bit of freedom in things that we do. But anybody who is kind of approaching the design has basically got to do a Parti kind of statement. And first we've got to everybody's got to kind of buy off on it and says, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Or really, that's your Parti, is you want to have this chair, you know, put in this particular location and everything's built around it. You know, whatever. I'm just making whatever up. And so the good thing is, like I said, it's just everybody, once we kind of establish that vision, and it's not just we're establishing the vision, it's we are establishing the vision with the client, you know, and it's because we're establishing their vision. And, you know, so as we're going through all of this, and once we get buy off on everybody who's involved with it, we always try to readdress it every time we go from step one concept.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Reinforce it every step of the way.
So we just finished DD and did our DD submission, but there were some changes that came post DD. In the very first thing that was asked once we started looking at these changes was, how does this help, hurt, reinforce, whatever, your big vision, or your big idea? And that was the first question that, he asked me. And it was just like, well, to be quite honest with you, the change was a good change. Because there was, we had this one thing and it was successful, but to me, there was this just kind of like nagging, like, well, could it be more? Can it be more? And then at this stage, with being at DD, can it be more, but still not cost any more than what we've already budgeted for? And the good thing is, it's literally all I did was I took a center, I can't say this was a group effort. We took like this, it was a common space that, was more of a wedge shape, and we squared it off. And it helped a lot with kind of clarifying the diagram. It helped a lot with clarifying the structural diagram, detailing and things like that. It helped out a lot. But how did that change help or hurt the big idea? And that was the first question, is if we make this change, what is it going to do to the big idea? Is it going to change it? Is it going to modify it? Do we have to rethink the idea? Now do we have to force an idea on this? Exactly. Yeah. And no, it reinforced the, this idea that we had. And I thought it feels good to be in a place where everybody has this very conscious direction for the building, and everybody is working towards maintaining that vision all the way through. Because a lot of times we'll get to a point where it's like, okay, the vision starts and stops in schematic design, or maybe it trickles into DD, but now we're in construction documents. Let's just do construction documents. Let's detail it out the way it was. And sometimes as you're starting to go through this thing and you starting to work it out and make it buildable, sometimes things that you're doing kind of hinder kind of like this grand vision of what you had. And so you have to reanalyze some things, and how do we get back to that vision? How do we get back to that big idea if what we're doing detailing wise doesn't quite get to where we're going? Then you kind of reanalyze it. But the good thing is that you're reanalyzing all the way through and making sure that it's working.
Yeah.
And so that's been very encouraging at ASG, is to really, every single person in there actually gives a shit about what the big idea is at every single point, even in specs. Even in specs, when you're doing just what sometimes is considered one of the most mundane things, is how are these specs supporting the big idea?
I had an example this week where I went and presented basically a Parti to the client for the first time. It was this project that we're redoing, and it's completely different than anything we've done before with this client. And I was, you walk in there and this idea is vulnerable, right? It's the first time they're going to hear it.
Yeah.
and there's definitely some stress involved with that. I'm kind of worried that, okay, what if, I wonder how they're going to react to this. And it's not like, there's not a fear in putting it out there. There's a fear in their reaction to what that could possibly be. Because it could be like, okay, well, all this was for nothing. Go back and start over. And the hope, obviously, is that doesn't happen. But I think what's interesting is that clients, I guess was what I mean by people, is that people who don't do architecture are wanting to latch on to something like this because it creates that story that they can get involved with in the project. They get to be a part of that. And when you can get it to its most clear terms so that it's totally understandable and they can latch onto it, they run with it. And they'll take that story and they'll tell everybody else, and it'll get those people excited about the project. And so when I'm going, I'm doing this little field house, and it's for the football team for this college, and I'm trying to give it an identity, right? It's like, okay, we don't have a lot of money to work with. But what can we do to not just make this the most basic building and actually make it their home on the campus? Because I think what's important, I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is that even if you have extremely constrained budgets or site conditions or whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. Maybe you've got an extremely limited materials palette. There's still ways to get that big idea in there. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. I think something that scares a lot of people away from practicing this way is that they just have some kind of a sense that it's more expensive to do this. And people don't want to spend extra money, right? Everybody's got a tight budget. So how do you make something interesting, meaningful, whatever, when you have these constraints? And so that's kind of our job, right? It's to figure out how we can do that. And so once I explained this idea, they were like, yes, let's do this. I mean, it was so one-sided. It was so black and white. It wasn't wishy-washy at all. It was like, I love this. I never thought we could have done something like this with the numbers that we're talking about. And so, and it was because I went in there very informed. I had already met with a structural engineer and a mechanical engineer before we even talked to the client for the first time, just to make sure that we felt like we could deliver what we're going to talk about. And so that confidence obviously helped me in my presentation reinforce that. But it was one of those things where it was like, okay, are you going to think this idea is really stupid? Or are you going to flip the other way, which I'm hoping, which is, yes, let's do this. This is the direction, and this is what we're going to tell everybody the direction is. And I think, again, it just kind of helps reinforce when you can make a clear idea stand out like that, that client or that owner jumps on it and owns it from then on out. And the cool thing about that is if you were to come back later and have that Parti all screwed up, they would be like, but what happened to the idea? Like, where'd that go? And so it keeps us all accountable now to make sure that happens. And because the owner's expecting it and they want it. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing about architecture that might be different from other art forms, where because they're so involved in the process the whole way through, that they have this expectation that it happens. Whereas like if you have some other art form where it's just kind of the mind of the artist, it's all on them to make sure that it happens. And if it doesn't, well, nobody knew about it. So there won't be any questions anyway.
It's kind of rewarding to have done all of that work ahead of time, to then to present this idea to them, and them, you coming in with such clear thought and such a well laid out idea, and kind of putting their big concerns, obviously, well, this is great, but can we afford it, kind of thing, and putting that immediately to rest by saying, yes, you can afford it because this is what we looked at this, and to make sure we didn't want to present you something that was unachievable, because that's always like the most fearful thing is, you're presenting these big, great, grand ideas, and are they achievable, or are they something that's just going to kind of fall apart as you start to develop the budget? Or you get, say, like a CM on board, and he's like, well, you remember how you wanted to do this? Well, you can't because you can't afford it.
Yeah, that was the thing with this particular presentation. It was like an owner's rep and a CM in the room. Those were the two people I'm presenting to. And it's like, if anybody's going to say no, it's going to be one of those people, right?
Right.
And
right.
so that's kind of the scary part about it, I think. And so when you get both of their heads nodding, the CM's going, yeah, this is totally doable. I think this is the right direction. And the owners,
that's just awesome.
It is an awesome feeling, and it doesn't always go that way, but when it does, it's hopefully, that's the goal, right? It's one of those things. And I think what's fun at the end is to compare that final product with that original diagram, and you've got that story that connects those two dots together. And if the client knows that whole story, which doesn't always happen in public work like this, so there's a lot of swapping in and swapping out of people, and the guard changes quite often. But if that doesn't happen, if it does stay, I mean, it's just one of the best, most rewarding things about doing what we do is when they say, this totally goes all the way back to that sketch or that diagram. And I think that's what makes it such a strong, rewarding statement, is when they can see those two dots getting connected and they get to tell everybody about it. And then all those people get to say, that story lives with the project. And because people want to be a part of that story. It's a really neat thing to experience at the end. And I think as architects, we see this. When I was in Scandinavia over the summer, I'm looking at Aalto's buildings, and I can totally see it because architects document stuff, right? So luckily, we've got those original diagrams, and we can go experience the final outcomes, and we can connect those dots. But in the projects that we do, we're really relying on the people who are going to be in those buildings, and they are the ones who are going to tell that story to all their colleagues and the other users of the buildings. And then that, I think, really determines a lot of the success of the project. So it's not for nothing, right? To do all this and to think about this and to do this, what probably a lot of people think is a foo-foo type of stuff that they don't want to waste their time doing. It really does have a lot of usefulness and meaningfulness to the final outcome and overall success of the project.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, did we beat that topic to death? I'm sure there's a lot more we could say, but I'm not thinking of it at the moment.
All right. Well, before we go, we'd like to thank our episode sponsors. First, we have Arcat. Check out all the features they offer at arcat.com. We're also sponsored by Core, powered by BQE. Core revolutionizes the way architects manage projects, time and expenses, billing, and accounting. Core saves you time while giving you the visibility, flexibility, and power you need to grow your firm. Learn more and get a free trial at bqe.com/core. And hey, do you want more Archispeak? Then visit archispeakpodcast.com, where you'll find links to our catalog of episodes. And while there, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. By doing so, you'll be notified when an episode goes live, and it will include links to everything we mentioned in that show's episode. To stay in contact between episodes, check out our Facebook page or hit us up on Twitter. You can find links to those accounts over at archispeakpodcast.com. Remember to tell a friend and stay subscribed, everyone. And thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. Spend time with folks at the home. How you doing? What you doing, boss? With my people who love all